fact that you're outside and constantly mixing. So if you did have, in the event that you did have a gas leak, it's always mixing with the atmosphere, so those percentages are diminished, on the outside system that we're talking about here, from a hazard standpoint.
Okay. So, under normal operations, you've never had a fire at any one of these regulator stations in the past 65 or 66 years. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In the exceptional or rare circumstance that there would be a fire at this station, how would you address it? Because I think Mr. Blues has also asked that question, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, we had a fire at the station. And again, remember that we're constantly monitoring and controlling the station. Our normal course of action would be to, it depends on how the call comes in, if it comes in from the public or first responder, fire department, or our own personnel. But the goal here is to kill the source. We would shut the station in and allow, we'd separate the station itself, close the inlet, close the outlet. Any gas that's trapped in that would be in the fire zone would be consumed, burned off. And so that would be our initial course of action. If our guys got there in time, again, from a remote shut-off, we would still dispatch our local personnel as well to carry out the repairs and place the unit back in service.
Can you talk a little bit about drills and the conduct of drills with local emergency response units?
Yeah, by code, we're required annually to carry out a drill, emergency response drill with OEM. I believe in 15 we had one. It's random throughout our franchise area. We chose Homedale. I think in 2015 we had our last drill here off of Roberts Road. During those drills, we simulate a pipeline incident. We communicate with the OEM. I believe the OEM, the PD, and the BPU all participate in those drills. And we carry out these drills in various areas of our franchise on an annual basis. We also, in terms of the fire official, we've agreed to provide a Knox box, which is an access key to our facility in case they happen to be the first on site. We go through and we've agreed that we would carry out training for those personnel. Even though you're a fire professional, doesn't mean you're a gas expert. So there's additional training that that fire personnel and first responders need in responding to a hazardous condition.
Photos. We had discussed earlier that we would present some photos to the board showing that freezing condition that you had mentioned earlier with respect to the Vonage site. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And have you brought some photos with you today?
Yes.
Do you want to sit down?
Is it possible that we, at least myself, could see that drawing up close? Because all I see is green and orange and white.
I actually made the same comment before, but you can only make boards so big. But I'm blind, so I thought it was just me.
You don't have reduced copies.
I don't. I'm not sure how I'm going to remedy that.
In the future, we should have reduced copies of whatever you're showing us there.
Oh, I'd be happy to do that.
We're all blind.
Yeah. I'd be happy to do that. I'm sorry.
pictures of the current location or a different location?
This is the temporary.
This is the temporary regulator station, and I'm just about to ask, I just didn't want to interrupt the board, but I'm just about to ask.
I interrupt, that.
Well, that's because you're sitting on the board.
Thank you.
That's really clear when you can see it.
Agreed. Before we move on from that display, I have one clarification question on that. It seems that the regulator that we're looking at and everything that revolves around this application is in the bottom left-hand corner. And generally, when we look at a project to see where it can be placed and why it's in the center, and I'm wondering why we're only seeing a quarter and we're not seeing anywhere further down on the other side of that purple line.
That's a good question. And it,
Why we are not seeing the proposed regulator in the center of the area that we're looking at, and we're not seeing anything further, looks like south of that purple line.
You're talking about A1?
The purple line.
yes.
What's about it, yes.
Well, I just want to make sure that everyone sees what we're talking about here. I guess the question is, why isn't this centered?
Marion, you want to just point out, so it's clear for the board members? Try to explain.
Explain what you're pointing to for the record.
Here,
Please.
and that's Exhibit A1.
Yes.
What's going on down here, why this stops right at this point, and we don't look at, the argument was that this had to be south here. What about south down here?
So why not south of the regulator of the transmission, the purple transmission?
Vonage.
South of Vonage.
Let me answer the first question first. The only reason that this is shown here is to provide scope of the entire system. There's nothing that we're attempting to hide. We really wanted to show the scope of the transmission system as they tie in. So we have a Route 36 line, we have our Homedale line, and we have the line on 520. This system here, we're showing in this particular location because, again, the yellow is the 100-pound system.
And there's no other 100-pound system? Is that south of that purple line?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's only north.
That's correct.
Could you repeat that? We didn't hear you.
There is no other 100-pound system that could be reflected in the gold south of the purple line. It's only north. That's
Right, and again, the site criteria was focused on this area feeding into the existing 100-pound system.
Just repeat that. I can't hear you.
So the question was, are there other 100-pound systems south of here, relatively speaking, south of there? There is nothing for us to tie in to south of 520 here in this particular location. And again, because of the siting, this isn't meant to mask anything. It's just trying to get the biggest bang for the buck for the photo itself, to kind of show the vastness of the system. There's obviously 100-pound piping in this area as well, but again, it's the proximity.
How many other stations like the one proposed within this system are either existing or proposed?
In this system right now, we have the three that we discussed. The Lincroft Station, 36 in Laurel, and we also have this particular station here.
And if I see a close-up of that map, I'll be able to see those on the map?
We don't have that would be a zoom away type view, but they're not shown here because we were focusing on this corridor, the pipeline project of the upgrade, as opposed to showing the entire system.
Okay. Mr. Sanders. I have two photos here, and I think we've pre-marked them as A3. Can you just describe what they are generally before talking about the details so that we can put it in the record and identify them?
Okay, this is the temporary regulator station at Vonage, below ground, no heat. This is the working regulator, so we have two regulators. The first regulator is upstream, which will be north of this, about five foot north of this one. The reason I chose this photo, obviously, is that this is the regulator that's actually performing the pressure drop. And so what we have here is encasement of the regulator, the piping, which is not shown in the vault. Again, this vault is probably 4 foot deep.
When was the photo taken?
This photo was taken in March of this year.
So
it's after the winter.
That's what I was going to say, Craig. That's a good question. So this depicts a condition in the end of winter, beginning of spring. Is that right?
That's correct.
So the condition that the board members and hopefully now members of the public are looking at doesn't depict what it would be like in the dead of winter. Is that right?
That's correct as well.
And what
Yes, we just, for the record, we have a specific date who took the picture, your witness did this.
were these pictures taken at your direction? Right?
Yes, they were taken at my direction. One of our repairmen took this picture.
You have a specific date?
I do not have it with me, but
Was it in or around March of 2016?
no, this was March of
2017. Sorry.
this
my
year,
fault.
18. This was March of this year. I don't remember if it was the 15th or the 20th.
And just, again, just for the, everyone's, can you describe,
We can't hear
are
you.
you looking down? Just describe what you're looking at. before you
Right.
describe
So
the
what we're doing is, this is a photo looking down into the 4-foot pit. There's a hose there, which is a sump hose in the top left corner. And this is showing the regulator running from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock. The device is encased. You can kind of see a faint outline, but it's encased in, probably 9 or 12 inches of ice. There-
one you're talking about now is the blue hose or the yellow hose?
Blue hose.
Just the one blue hose?
Yes.
So this is the first picture. Do you want us to individually mark
No, that's
them?
fine, as long as we can identify them.
Is the ice from the pressure drop alone, or is there also fluid accumulating in the space that's freezing?
That's a good question. This is from the pressure drop because, again, the sump is there. If we do have conditions where you have groundwater that will seep into the device and also freeze the device. But this is not the case. You can see the blue stone in the bottom. But yes, this is from the pressure drop itself. And what you can't really see here is that through that wall going south, there's also additional freezing there. But on the right side of the photo, you can see what these are called pilot regulators, which are the small quarter turn handles.
This here?
Valves here and here. So in the bottom right, there's a pilot, which is, you can see the red handle.
So again, just for the record, the sump pump is on the top. So we
Top,
hold that picture on the
yes,
sump.
top left,
Okay.
sump pump. The bottom right is a pilot.
The pipe coming in here, what diameter is that?
That's a half-inch
Half
pipe.
inch? That's what's supplying the gas here?
Yes,
Half-inch pipe?
yes.
I know, for some reason I thought the pipe was a lot bigger than it was.
Louder, please.
No, that's a control point. So this is how the regulator sees the pressure. So it's not the gas flow, it's the device itself, and without getting into the details of it, the device is actually looking downstream through that control point to say, I see this pressure, let me do this corrective action. So those are supply lines. The flow is actually through this 8-inch piping. So you can't see the piping because of the ice, but it's going from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock is the actual line of the pipe.
So, Mr. Sanders, we had discussed that this was taken in March of 2018.
Yes.
And I started to question you about the condition in the winter. How could that differ from what the board and members of the public are seeing on this photo marked A3?
And during the winter, when we have more flow and more consistent flow, this encasement would be larger than you see here now. And we haven't shown those other photos in the past, but
Not part of this hearing.
not part of this hearing.
And
But,
that's
it will be significantly, it will be larger than this.
And Mr. Sanders, we're referring to these other photos. There's a reason why we didn't show those photos at this hearing, is that right?
Right, that's correct.
And that's because this is the Vonage station.
Yeah, and that was one of the concerns, that wasn't raised the last time, but, because we can't talk about those things before, but we want to show you the exact station and not a similar station, because that was a concern.
And is it true that we just don't happen to have a picture of the condition of this underground regulator station in the wintertime?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. The second of these photos marked A3. And could you just identify what that yellow
Right, and
tube is on the bottom right-hand corner?
so the second photo, you have the blue hose, which is the sump pump, and on the bottom right, you have a yellow hose, which we use. We attach it to a heater, a horizontal heater, and we actually work to thaw the device out. And that process could take about an hour, 45 minutes to get down to the regulator itself.
And again, this condition that you are describing on A3, has this occurred every year at the Vonage station since the transmission line was installed?
Yes, without a doubt. This is typical for this location.
I don't have any more questions on the photos unless the board has any.
Can we talk a little bit more about
Can you talk to the mic, please?
Valerie's question before. I'm still confused about this process. I watched the pipe go through Homedale roads. So at one point, I presume that the gas company had to come to Homedale and say, we want to put a new pipe in the ground. Okay, and they probably said, why? And you probably gave some reasons to somebody. And during that time, did somebody say to the town, listen, besides this pipe, phase 2, we're going to have to put in a regular station, or whatever you want to call it, a heater station. And the town said, okay, we're aware of all of this. Did that happen?
I can't speak to that directly because I wasn't part of that whole process. But again, in terms of the implementation, I'm not aware of why that wouldn't have happened. But I don't know how that contact was initially made because the initial approval the notice did go out to the town, to the residents.
So you're saying the town knew all along that there was going to be a site?
I'm not saying that.
I think the answer is, Mr. Franatopoulos is, Mr. Sanders doesn't know that. He didn't participate in that part of the process. Again, he's a witness here for purposes of the operation and why we need the facility, but he's just not able to answer that question.
All right.
Do you have a witness who can answer this question?
We can't hear you.
I'll make an inquiry on that.
I would like to know the process that was taken when that pipe went down. Who did they go to? Who approved it? I'm sure Homedale had to say okay to that, okay? And why was this part of phase 1 and phase 2? Was it shown to the town that was a second location would be needed to put this in? The town said, okay. Is there papers, anything that shows all of that occurred?
Thank you for that, because I'm going to take copious notes, but I'll do my best to get an answer for you on that.
Mr. Sanders, before you go,
He's not done yet.
He's not done
No rush,
you
Greg.
mentioned to the board the need for a heater in this location, but you didn't explain to us the size of it, how it's going to work, any details on it. Are you the person to do that, or is somebody else going to give the board that information?
Well, my site engineer, Mr. Antilli, is going to describe the dimensions of the heater, which I think was part B of your question. In terms of part A,
I can speak to how it's going to work and the operations of it. I'm not sure if that is the question.
You have 250 regulator stations throughout the system. How many of those have heaters? And how many of those have this type of heaters?
Right.
And now, are there other type of heaters that can accomplish the same thing?
I can answer that. The first part.
the first part.
We have 35 heaters in our system at 33 different sites. We have a variety of heater types. This particular heater is a vacuum chamber heater, which means that the glycol or the heating agent is in a vacuum. We have different types of heaters, which are water bath heaters. We have other heaters that are catalytic heaters, but they're all based on flow. And so the recommendation of this type of heater, which we have approximately 6 to 8 heaters of this type, cold water technology type heater. And again, the type depends on the flow. And so I hate to say this, but it depends on the actual flow and design criteria as to what type of heater that we would choose for the application, if that makes sense.
Yes, but what other criteria could you use to come up with, you call it a water bath heater or a cold bath heater?
Yes, this is a cold water technologies heater. It's a brand name.
There are other heaters out there that produce less emissions.
I'm just going to interject here.
Yeah.
I think we've indicated our position on this particular issue, and you correct me if I'm wrong as to where you're going, but the design of this system and the equipment to be utilized within the system, it's the gas company's position that it solely rests within their jurisdiction and the jurisdiction of the BPU. So let me just finish, and you can tell me where you require more information. So the heater and the system that we're proposing, a determination was made based upon the gas company's exclusive jurisdiction for this to be the heater at this location as the most appropriate for the flow that Mr. Sanders just referenced.
I don't disagree.
But to jump in, part of what Ms. Skidmore said was right, but this board also has the right to propose certain conditions and other things as part of this application. And part of those proposals has to do
Mike,
with
please.
different systems, and they need, I think the engineer needs to know to recommend us what went into that. I mean, there may be no other system that can go here, I think is what we're getting at, or maybe there are potential others. May not be reasonable, but at least you have some information that you give us. Now, you may still object that it's not within our
I'm going to
decision
object to
make
that.
condition, but we clearly have the right to ask the question, and I know this board wants to ask the question, so I think we should at least answer it, subject to knowing that you put your objection on the record. That's fine.
I think Mr. Sanders has answered the question to the degree that he's able to answer the question, but I'm going to object again. I don't respectfully, it's the company's position and my position that it's just not within the jurisdiction of this board to make a determination as to what alternative type of heater may be appropriate. It just isn't in their jurisdiction. I understand in the context of another use variance application pertinent, where a public utility was not involved and not subject to the statutory mandate that we are subject to, that type of condition may or may not be appropriate, but in this case it isn't. That's our position.
And I think the board's going to want to know an answer subject to your objection. I mean,
Can you use the mic, please?
It's a reasonable question, subject to your objection, so the engineer can figure out and the board can figure out where. I mean, I don't think we got a clear answer, to be honest with you, but if the board can, I know that because
What specifically, what further information specifically are you looking for?
Well, are there other heaters available, other brands or other ways of keeping the gas that produce the same end effect, which may cause less emissions or less harmful emissions or no emissions?
Did we testify to emissions?
And just a second, to follow up on that, you have a copy of the letter from the Homedale Environmental Committee that raises very specific environmental objections that they have. So we all, of course, have a copy of that. I think at some point that's going to get entered into the record. And so what our engineer is asking is directly relevant to our concerns about the environment. We need to know if there's other types of heaters that are available that can do what needs to be done with less environmental impact, that maybe can have different locations. So with all due respect, respectfully, we feel it's important for us to know. So.
And I absolutely understand your position on that, but we will not be supplying that, the data that would be required to come to a conclusion as to other types of heaters. We will not be supplying that information based upon our position. And the board can make a determination with that information in hand. We will not be doing that. That's our position on this.
Yeah, but we're not asking for that data. I'm simply asking to Mr. Sanders' knowledge, are there other type of units that could do the same job? He's an expert in this field.
Again, I'm not sure how to say it any other way. We are not going to provide that information. That is not the jurisdiction of this board. It just is not. And we can agree to disagree and let another forum make that determination, but that is the position.
Mr. Plusis, as our expert, do you have the belief or the opinion, is a question, that there may be other technology available that has less environmental impact?
Yes.
And is less visible, right? More aesthetically pleasing, less disruptive to the environment?
Mr. Plusis, do you have any experience in natural gas delivery service?
No.
Okay.
But you've done research as our engineer, and you've spent considerable time looking into possible alternatives that may exist as our expert, is that right?
With the limited information the gas company has provided me, yes.
But just to reiterate, you're not a gas utility expert.
No, I don't think he's testifying.
Okay.
He's just trying to get an answer to a question that you clearly said you're not going to answer. I think that's going to leave the board with an open question. But if you're not going to answer, he's not asking for data. He's just asking for an answer to a question. But
I think the position, though, is that as Mr. Plusis recognized in his letter, is that data is required as part of a discussion as to what other heater may be appropriate. That's the fundamental issue
I
here.
just said he didn't need data, so
Well,
whether
we-
he said that in his letter or not, he now said he doesn't need the data, so.
But in order,
Why should he answer without the data?
in order just,
Will you answer the question?
just for me to be clear, in order for Mr. Sanders to answer that question, as is there another heater that would be an appropriate alternative, there would have to be the analysis provided as to the flow data. That's the only way Mr. Sanders can do that. Mr. Sanders, are you responsible for the design of this system that we're talking about here?
No, that would be our planning and engineering group.
Mr. Sanders is only here for purposes of operations and the need for the facility, is that right?
That's correct.
So Nancy, the person that's going to testify, the engineer on the heater and its emissions, obviously that's a big concern for me personally, knowing that right across the street is Homedale's winery, and I say the word Homedale, but it's actually owned by a private person. And I'm very concerned on what the effect will be on her business there, which is our business in our town. It's our winery.
I absolutely understand that, Mr. Orfranatopoulos. We will have an air quality expert that will discuss those issues, without a doubt. I understand that's a very big
And
concern.
that's why Mr. Plusas is asking about other systems that may be more efficient in the emissions. So I think we have a right to know if there is, and we should be part of your presentation. Why you selected the unit that you did.
And I say this again in the most respectful way, I simply don't think you're entitled to that information based upon our statutory mandate. I simply cannot give that to
Okay,
you.
so just so the record is clear, the board has requested this information and you respectfully
Use mic,
are declining
please.
to provide it.
I am.
Okay, understood.
Okay, Mr. Sanders, we do have another set of photos. And I'm going to show them to you and tell you that they have been preliminarily marked A4.
Mr. Moore, how much more time do you think, obviously without our interruptions, it's but without that, how much more time do you think?
I actually, well, let me say this. I didn't think Mr. Sanders was going to go on this long because I actually didn't think we were going to have questions during the course of his testimony.
I said, audience.
I know what you did. I know you did. So,
Because my
with the
intention is to
understanding,
go probably at least till 10 o'clock, and then I'll see where we are, so we're going to go later than we would normally go. But I want to take a 2-minute break,
sure.
so maybe we'll let him finish and then we'll take a quick break.
Yeah, and Ms. Avron, we will try and move as quickly through the testimony as we can. And I would
It's
just
not
make
your
the
fault.
request.
We're interrupting you a lot, that's not your fault.
No.
I can't blame you for that.
It's immeasurable, I guess. Okay, Mr. Sanders, we're looking at an exhibit that's been preliminarily marked A4. Just, and are there 3 photos here? Is that right?
Yes.
And can you just describe a title for each of these without going into the description?
So the first photo that you see, there's a wall and piping that I would consider to be regulator runs and sound wall. The second photo is of our heater that's proposed for this
Hold it up in the air so.
location. I'm sorry. So that would be the second photo, which is the heater itself. And the third photo is a representative filter, the filter that will be used at this particular location at another site. So it's an example of a filter that would be used.
Okay.
Who took these photos? When were they taken? Where are they exactly?
Yeah, so
I know it's that water.
the first photo is a photo in Ocean Township. This is off of, this is what we call Serpentine.
Can you hold it up so we make sure we
Station.
look at the right one? Okay, that's a good.
These were all taken by my maintenance personnel.
The date?
This date is, this is probably a few years old. I would say this is I would think this might be a 15 or 14
Is there
photo.
any reason why we can't have current photos instead of these things 2, 3, 4 years old?
You could. I was just going to follow up on that question. Mr. Sanders, does this photo, the first photo of A4, accurately depict what the situation is out there today?
Yes, it does.
So, Mr. Orphanatopoulos, yes, we brought these because these were similar photos, and you are absolutely right. This first one may be 3 years old, but it is still the identical, well, I don't want, Mr. Sanders,
Yeah,
it
there are no
depicts what's out there
changes here.
today.
You know, our stations don't really change significantly. You know, so this depicts what's there now as well.
This is a huge area now, I mean, based on this photo, this doesn't look like the kind of proposed
Is
area
mic,
that
please?
you're proposing in Homedale.
So this second photo, the second
Ms.
photo,
Alvin, did you have a question on the first photo? Is that, or what do you?
These are in the same location?
No, we were going through each photo one by one.
Sorry, first one is in Ocean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And let me just follow up, just so the record's clear, because it may not have been. Is the first photo that we're looking at, Craig, this is of the station that you said is in Ocean Township?
yes.
Okay. And is
Ocean County.
Ocean County, sorry?
Yes, that's
And
that's in Berkeley, Berkeley Township. And the reason we choose these locations again is to try to give you a flavor of a very similar location. We're not trying to hide anything or infer that something's different. It's just that it's difficult to find a similar configuration because we have so many different types of designs. To find a run with a sound wall, which is what we're proposing here, and that's why this location was chosen.
right, and so you got to my point before I even asked it. So this regulator run here that we're showing in A4 photo 1 is similar to the regulator run that would be out on the station that we're proposing today. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the sound wall that's being shown here, that's also similar to the sound wall that we are proposing on the station here today?
Yes, that's also correct.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about this in terms of this photo, Mr. Sanders?